Okay, it's just after 2 o'clock, so we'll get started. My name is Bernie Daigle, and I look after knowledge transfer for the Atlantic Forestry Center. Bonjour tout le monde, je m'appelle Bernard Daigle, puis je m'occupe du transfert de connaissances pour le Centre de foresterie de l'Atlantique. Avant de commencer, j'aimerais souligner quelques remarques d'ordre administratif. Before starting, I'd like to go over a few housekeeping notes. As was stated in the email invitation, today's presentation will be in English. The webinar is being recorded, and the recording will be made available to the participants. The presentation slides and the questions and answers will also be available to the participants in both French and English. Tel qu'indiqué dans le courriel d'invitation, cette présentation sera donnée en anglais. Le webinaire sera enregistré et disponible aux participants. Les diapos de la présentation ainsi que les questions et réponses seront aussi disponibles en français et en anglais. Nous vous demandons d'utiliser l'icône de questions-réponses pour poser vos questions. Les questions peuvent être posées soit en anglais ou en français, mais nous allons attendre jusqu'à la fin de la présentation pour répondre aux questions. We ask that you use the question and answer button to ask your question. This is located at the bottom of your screen. The questions may be asked in English or in French, but we'll wait until after the presentation is over to answer the questions. I'll now pass it over to Donnie McPhee. Donnie is coordinator of the National Tree Seed Center, and he'll be giving today's presentation. Je vais maintenant passer la parole à Donnie McPhee. Donnie est coordonnateur du Centre national de semences forestières et va donner la présentation d'aujourd'hui. So, Donnie, it's all yours.
Great. Well, thank you, Bernie. So welcome to this second of a series of seminars geared to those looking for support in areas related to the seed supply chain of forest trees and shrub seeds. As Bernie mentioned, I'm Donnie McPhee, and I'm the coordinator here at the National Tree Seed Center, which is located on the East Coast out here in Fredericton, New Brunswick, and resides on the traditional lands of the Lowistoque First Nation. While we're doing this in support of the 2 billion trees, we also just want to ensure you that knowledge exchange is part of our mandate. And it's not just restricted to those obtaining funding. So if you need any information, even though you're not part of the 2 billion tree program, we're still open for business and to support you. Okay. There we go. Good. So while we are physically located on the traditional lands of the Lowistoque, we also want to acknowledge that we conduct our work activities on treaty lands and territories of numerous and diverse Indigenous nations and pay tribute to their heritage and legacy. As a national center, we try to work from sea to sea to sea in this great country of ours. This second of a series of seminars is aimed to support small to medium-sized enterprises, communities, regional collaborators, and those looking to start or increase their capacity regarding seed collection, processing, storage, in particular at this time, those that are looking to become involved in the 2 billion tree program. We're going to post link to the first seminar that we conducted last month on small scale equipment needs. And then as Bernie said, we can follow up with the recording, resources, answers to the question and answering documents for anyone who's registered for the seminars, or also anyone who signs up for our National Tree Seed Center newsletter, where we also will have training videos associated with the steps involved in the seed supply chain. Good. So before we get into the presentation, and again, we're hoping that these seminars sort of link together because I don't want to repeat, but for this time, we're just going to go the evolving mandate of the National Tree Seed Center for those who don't know anything about us. Again, the Seed Center was established in 1967 in Petawawa, Ontario. And at that time, it was really focused on obtaining, storing, and providing native Canadian tree seed of known origin. And that's the important part for research purposes. It was in these early years that the CFS, along with the National Tree Seed Center, worked with our provincial seed centers and their collaborators to develop the tree breeding programs that are still in place today. And indeed, much of the seed used by our industrial forest sector comes from these well-established programs that are run by our provinces. In 1996, the center moved to Fredericton, New Brunswick, and this coincided with new commitments by our federal government to the things like the Convention of Forest Biodiversity and the Federal Species at Risk Act. And that really changed or added to our mandate, because now we were looking at working with conservation issues, and also we started including shrubs at that time. And a lot of our conservation issues were to do with genetic resources that were under threat by invasive pests, pathogens, and climate change. So we've been in existence for over 50 years, and we really feel that we've gained a lot of expertise in the collection and distribution of seed for research, and also in collaborating with conservation and recovery programs, along with innovations in small-scale seed handling, testing, and storage protocols. Now, with the announcement of the 2 Billion Tree Program, we envisioned that there may be potential seed-related gaps regarding resources and training materials that might be available to people looking to become part of the program. Now, I just want to point out that in different regions of the country, there's varying levels of expertise and support currently available. And all we're trying to do is really work with those organizations and fill in the gaps and do our best to help out in providing the knowledge needed for a successful program. So this brings us to the topic of the day. And in the 30 minutes coming up here, there's no way we could possibly dive into all the factors related to forecasting, field collections, transportation to processing facilities, cleaning and storage of our spring cedars. But what this presentation is meant to do is give you an overview and then provide you and let you know that we're here as a resource to help you get through whatever needs that you might come upon. So the first slide here, and things you need to be thinking about with the spring cedars, is things like the age of the trees, and are the trees and the populations are from your region, or the spots you've identified collection, are they sexually mature? And that really comes down to, do you see seed on your trees? Most of our spring cedars only come into seed every 2 to 7 years, so you're not going to get seed every year. So when you do see a good collection year, you really got to be planning to make hay when the sun shines. Get that collections thinking 3 to 5 seasons out. Make collections for the next 3 to 5 years. Some of the other things you want to be looking at is your crown size and position of the trees. Again, dense canopy crowns are going to be very hard to collect from. So if you can identify beforehand nice crowns that are kind of more in the open that you can make easy collections from, that's going to be help you in the long run. And then you got to be thinking of some of the stressors that might interfere with some of these early spring cedars, that things happen really quickly, and we'll get into it, where pollination happens and literally you have seed ready to be picked in 4 to 6 weeks. So a lot happens in a short period of time. So at the same time, a lot of things can go wrong. One of the things, this is sort of an example of, first of all, these are all our spring cedars that we're talking about, our poplars, our willows, our maples, and our elm. And already, most of these have already seeded. And when you look at the start to the end for all our spring cedars, you're really looking at, for the majority, 4, 6, 8 weeks, and everything's done. So in that time period, you have to already do your forecasting, you have to do your collections, you have to do and have everything shipped and ready to go to your facilities in a very short period of time. So at the end of the program or the seminar, I'll talk about this, because we can provide you, depending on where in the country you lived, with more accurate mapping tools, so you know when these cedars might be coming into seed in your region. So for some of the other things you really need to consider with looking at wild stand collections. And again, we don't want to be making collections from single trees. We really want to maximize the genetic diversity of our collections for future uses. And so that means a nice variety of trees from a wide area to make sure that we're getting good genetic diversity and a good mixture in our collections. Your goal and how much you want to collect really depends on, what your long-term goals are. So our goal at the Seed Center is we like to have 3,000 to 5,000 seed per tree, and then about 20 trees in a given region. But again, that's for research and conservation purposes. For your purposes, you're probably looking at multiplying these factors by 10, 20 if you're looking to go into production forestry. For forecasting of your populus and aspen, finding trees in seed is really what you should be looking for now. Understand there's male and female trees, so don't be alarmed if only 50% of the trees in a stand are in seed, because the other 50% are probably female or male. The first of the aspens, or the poplars that comes in, is trembling aspen. And one thing that's for all seed collection, I want to say here is that there's really not a lot of guessworking when it comes to collection of mature seed. You can either ignore what the seed and its indicators are telling you and collect too early, or you can wait too long after the indicators have told you that they're right, and then it's going to be too late and everything's going to be gone. Again, things happen really quickly. There are visual cues that will indicate to you where and when you should be collecting, so you're doing it the right time. And I know that's easier said than done when things are happening so fast. But in general, all mature seed will change color. The pods, the catkins will start to change color when they're ripe. So this is Populus grandifolia, I think, here. So again, nice and green, still probably too early. This is just another example of too late. The seed pods have already opened. But if you look up here, this looks like tremuloides here, but the catkins are just starting to change from a dark green to a light yellow, and you're starting to see little fluff, and that's the indicator, time to collect. Okay, again, very short window. You can go from dark green to time to collect to empty in 3 to 5 days at times, or even quicker, depending if you get really hot weather. So you really have to keep an eye on stuff and go at it hard when it's ready. The willows are very, very similar, similar indicators. This is Salix discolor here. Pussy willow is one of the first of the Salix ready. It's already very close here in Fredericton, New Brunswick. We've had a very warm spring. But again, looking for those color changes in your catkins. When it comes to the maples, again, looking for color change. So for our soft maples, we have red maple, silver maple, and then we have the hybrid, Acer Friedman, and which is naturally occurring in some areas, but it's also used in our nurseries for urban plantings in many areas. But again, you're looking for that seed to go from a dark green, just starting to change color. So this is almost a brownish red. And as soon as you start to see the Samara change color, you know they're ready for collecting. A couple of key things on the slide is just remember, they have double Samara on all of our maples. And in general, most times one of the Samara or seed is going to be empty. So when you're making your collections, you might look like you have a lot of seed, but in your mind, you're thinking that 50% of this is empty to start with. So that's going to come in when we get to our quantities in a little bit down the side. Now, I don't know how many people are actually looking to collect elm. I mean, Dutch elms is really tough on our elm. But we do have slippery elm as well. But if you are looking for making collections of elm, it's the same thing. You're looking for that color change. So again, you're going to see these are still dark green. The leaves are still immature, meaning that they're probably not ready, as opposed to these are ripe seed. They're going to turn nice and brown, and you already see that they're not going to be mature until the leaves are fully elongated. That's another good indicator for you. You can see this circle here where seed is already starting to break. So this is the time for collection. Again, at this stage up here, you can be doing some of your forecasting, and you can be actually taking some and just feeling that seed between your fingers or ripping them open to make sure there actually is seed in, embryos in that seed. Yeah, so those are just some of the indicators you're looking for. We presented this in our first seminar, but it was the collection supply tools, and we can, again, provide this to anybody. Anyone who's attending the seminar will provide this list, but specifically for spring seeding, you got to make sure you have breathable bags, and even your bins should be graded. Any boxes that you're using should be ventilated. And before you even start making collections, you really have to start thinking down the road about, when I make the collections, do I have a nice draft-free room for spreading my poplar and willows? Because any draft is going to have that fluff up in the air, unless you have containers that can hold it down that are still allow for ventilation. You've got to be thinking of dehumidifiers, depending on what part of the country you are, to lower the humidity. And then once you have it extracted, to get it into your cooler. So again, even before you start collecting, these are all things you really need to start thinking about. And one thing with our poplars and willows is, I know a lot of times it can be discouraging. You know, you travel 200-300 kilometers to make your collections. You get there, they're not quite ripe. I know that Anne and Kim with out in Alberta with Wild Rose. They've had quite a bit of success with taking branches and putting them in water while they transport, which allows kind of an after ripening. So that's something you can play around with. Again, when it comes to actually collecting, again, we really tend to, or aim to, walk lightly and harvest with respect, understanding that if we find a good area to make collections, we probably want to come back there year after year. So we tend to, whenever possible, use pick from the ground from low-lying branches. We use pole pruners. But if you are on Crown land, and if you have the proper permission and certification for cutting trees, and you have a certified chainsaw operator, again, with poplars and willows, most of them are clonal. So by taking down one heavy seed tree, you could probably collect, you know, over 1 million seed from one tree. So again, depending on how much seed you need, we really find that, you know, taking 3 or 4 heavy branches, that we can also get up to, you know, 500,000 seed from an individual tree. For salix, again, the obstacles are a little different. Most of our salix you can collect from the ground using just hooks and lines and hand picking, stripping them into buckets and bags. For some of the larger willows, like black willow, I'm thinking, pole pruners are very handy. But again, some of the things you got to be careful for just when you're out there is where they grow. Again, a lot of the willow habitat can be pretty treacherous for walking and getting around. And then you have to be careful because it's shrubby. So when you're making collections, secure those bags after you have them full. The last thing you want to have is your bags being ripped open by branches and stuff as you're walking through. And just an example, and we're going to get into this a little bit, but there was a study by Campbell up in northeastern Ontario, and they were shown to be able to collect about 187,000 pure seed in an hour. So pretty substantial collections. For our maples and elms, we encourage whenever possible to collect seed directly from the tree. So this helps in all the subsequent processing endeavors down the road. It helps eliminate, you know, picking up the undesirable dirt and ground material into your collection bags. It eliminates possibility of collecting seed from other species, or if you are looking for single tree collections, of mixing up seed from different trees into one collection. And we'll talk about how this helps with keeping our purity levels high in upcoming slides. But just a quick example, we did a project with the Nashwauk Watershed Association for maple last year, and I know from their records that they got about 80,000 viable seed, and this is after grading, and it was about 170 liters of seed to get that 80,000 viable seedlings in the ground. Another method that we use at times when pole pruning, maybe the branches are too high, is a tarp and shake or tarp and break or tarp and cut method. All can be used for high branches. Again, you'd set up tarps on the ground underneath the trees. And there's a little video here. And again, when you receive this PowerPoint, you can click on this as a live video. It's a 3-minute video that'll explain this all out. One of the things you really have to watch out for, though, is you can only really do this on calm days. Otherwise, as the seed falls, it's going to blow away. And again, placement of your tarps is very important because you use it on high branches. And if a branch falls from that high up, when it hits the ground and the seed's ready, a lot of time it's going to explode with the seed all over the place. So there's a little video there that you can watch. If you're thinking about embarking on seed collecting activities, we encourage you to keep good records of the time it takes you to make collections and what your end results are. And that's data that really is lacking out there. For us, historically, all of our collections have been for research and conservational purposes. And it's something that unfortunately we really never did a lot of timing with because money wasn't really an issue. We're looking to make small collections. But the data presented on this slide comes from a study in Northeastern Ontario, where the authors showed the number of seed collected per hour by one person. And I think this is really valuable information. And you can see balsam poplar, which is the only of one of the spring seeders on this list. They were able to collect up to 1 million seed in 1 hour of time. So that's really good information to have. And any information that you can share with us to help fill out some of these graphs that we can share along to other collectors would be really, really nice to have. Something else that's really important for all of our seed collecting is field labeling. And again, we encourage you to label the outside of the bag, label a tag and put it inside the bag. And then at the end of the day, having a spreadsheet, a summary sheet that you can have to provide with the nursery going forward. So seed lot registration is extremely important and it's becoming more and more important. Our forest industries and policymakers and reclamation industry, they already do this because they know that they have to use appropriate seed. If they don't, it costs money and it also lowers survival and growth rates. And part of the 2 billion tree program is all about using the right seed from the right location to be planted back to the right location. And for that to happen, you need to have good documentation of where your seed came from. Otherwise, it might be immiscible into the program. Good. So another reoccurring theme with all of our seed collection is the reduction of moisture. And there's 2 simple rules for all of our orthodox seed collections. You need to start reducing humidity and temperature as quickly as possible. For the spring seeders, this is even more important because you have to think all of these spring seeders, they were fertilized, the seed developed, they dropped from the ground. They want to germinate right now. Soon as they hit the ground and the temperature's warm and there's moisture available, they germinate. A lot of the other seed that we're going to get into, your berries and your fall, they need stratification. So biologically, they're not ready to germinate. So you have a little more time to play with them. But that is not the case with our spring seeders. The only one of the spring seeders, there's always an exception to the rules, is silver maple. Silver maple is recalcitrant. And if you dried it down the way you dry down the other seed, you're going to kill it. So in general, with silver maple, the best you can hope to do is to make your collection, remove that surface moisture on it, try to get it down to about 47% and hold it in a cool environment until you're ready to have it until you ship it to your nursery and have it grown. There has been limited success shown, and there's a paper here referenced about taking silver maple and actually storing it for up to 18 months at -3. But even then, there was a drastic reduction in vigor and germination rates. So if you want to try that, you can, but just understand that you're going to have a lot of seed to get your desired numbers. Before you start making your spring seeding collections, you also need to have a plan on how you're going to get that seed to a processing facility. Lots of things to take into account here, and they all need to be planned out for. One of the biggest issues we see is overpacking of seed and not allowing for expansion of the catkins and lack of airflow leading to increased temperatures and moisture, which we all know now is very detrimental to our seed and seed quality. One of the things we're really encouraging people to do. You can buy these Kelsler data loggers, very inexpensive. You put a data logger into your collection, you have it Bluetooth, not Bluetooth, but you have it Wi-Fi or whatever to your phone. So any collections you make, you can actually track from the time you collected all the way until the time it's processed what happened to it. And this is really going to help you with troubleshooting. Like was there a time in shipping when all of a sudden moisture levels and humidity and temperature rose? Or maybe you send it to a seed processing facility and it sat there for 2 or 3 weeks before it got processed. And all that's going to let you know, okay, seed quality is going down, seed quality is going down. I know Alberta Seed Matters, they recommend shipping within 3 days after you make the collection to the extraction facilities to have it laid out and dried. And then you have in Alberta, Northern Alberta, you have 10 to 14 days after that time to get it all cleaned and processed and stored. But relative humidity values in Alberta in May are like 20 to 45% maybe, but other part of Canada, including here in Fredericton, we can get humidity levels as high as 70, 80%. So we find that from the time we make our collection in the field, we really need to have that seed cleaned and processed 5 to 7 days. Otherwise, our germination rates start to drop. So for extraction from so we're going to call this fluff for today, but for extraction of the seed from our willows and poplars, you can really treat them pretty much the same, but the process is basically the same. Is that you're going to have your seed, you're going to have airflow pushing down through that seed. So again, this is a sort of our setup here. So after the catkins have opened up, you have the great fluff. We put it into a tumbler. The tumbler is going at about 45 revolutions per minute. And we have dry air from a hairdryer and a shop vac blowing at it. And with that process, in about 45 minutes, we can dry a whole batch of seed down and have the seed extracted. So again, in this tumbler, there's a shelf underneath that we pull out and we can bring our seed out from it. So really kind of, but there are other innovations. I know that out at NATE, Northern Alberta Institute of Technology, they have something similar, but it's set up in a cement mixer. So again, there's all kinds of different types of equipment out there, but the important part is getting it done quickly. So as we went over in the first seminar, there's a wide range of tools and equipment that can be used to increase purity. And increasing purity is extremely important to the growers. We need to get rid of all the impurities, and that would include bits of dust and debris. It would include things like damaged seed. So we use a wide range of sieves and cloth bags and air column separators. And again, we can provide information on all this. The most important thing, though, is getting rid of all of this impurities and trying to get down to a nice, clean seed lot, which is extremely important to our nurseries because all those impurities add up to time and money for them by putting impurities into seed cells and thinking that it's seed, okay? So we really want to have nice, clean seed. And again, it's very important that you work with your nurseries. So again, currently in BC, they're looking for 87% purity for their current seed lots. But that's, again, working with most of the conifer seeds. We also need to work with our nurseries because there's a lot of different type of seed that we just can't get to that purity. And there's this is the same study from Northeastern Ontario, where, again, using low-tech equipment, and this is for a study looking at mine site reclamation, again, there are certain species, including balsam poplar, they were able to get down to 100% purity. So again, if you're providing a nursery with 100% seed, then there's a good chance you might be able to convince them to single or at the very most double seed each cell. But once you get into even this, 97 to 94, they're going to want a double seed. And once you get below 90, we're talking about triple. And the lower you go down, you might end up in a situation where nurseries are going to need to use 5 or 6 seed or maybe even more per cell, because empty cells take space and it costs them money. So it's something that you really have to be careful and considering. Good. So I'm getting a little bit lost here in my notes and stuff, but this is for maximizing seed storage potential. So one of the things we want to reestablish is that all the species we talked about today, except for silver maple, you can store them long term. And long term, we're talking at least 10 to 14 years, as long as you're using good processes and timing. You have to be super organized. And what this chart is showing here, again, if you can get your seed collected, processed, and stored, where you get your moisture content down around that 7%, or if you're using ERH, it would be an ERH sort of between 0.02 and 0.01. If you can get your seed into this range, then you can expect to get 14 years at least storage capacity for all of our spring seeders. Each step is extremely important in getting good high quality seed. And that goes from the time you collect your seed, it goes to how you handle it once you collect it. It's the extraction, it's the drying down, and then it's that storing. And again, this is a really brief, we're quickly running through this, but all this information is available in more depth than we can provide it to you. Couple of last slides, and this is again more things that you should be thinking about for planning ahead. And the example we're using here is red maple. So again, say you want to, for this year, I'm planning to go 100,000 red maple, and you're going out making collections. So we already said if it's a good seed year, maybe you should be thinking at least 3 years ahead. So in this example, we're going to say, let's collect enough red maple for 100,000 seed a year for the next 3 years, meaning you need about 300,000 seed. So some of the things you really have to be thinking about on top of that, because if you go out and just make a collection of 300,000 seed and think you're going to have 300,000 seed, you're going to be surprised. So again, saleable seedlings. Every seedling that germinates, or every seed that germinates, is not going to develop into a good, healthy seedling that can be used. So right off the bat, you're going to lose about 20%. We already talked about in the maples that it's double Samara, and one of those Samara you have to think is probably empty. So you just lost 50% there. So we can provide this table, but the point is to get about 100,000 seed a year, or 300,000 for 3 year, that you actually need about 17 20-liter pails. So that's about 342 liters of fresh seed from red maple to get you that 300,000. And for every species, it's going to be a little different, but you still got to be thinking long term and what that means. So again, in the 2 billion tree program, and I want to say this, hopefully it's okay. I know there was a slogan that started, it was 2 billion trees starts with 2 billion seed. That has been changed. That is not the case. It's estimated that about 11 billion seed is actually going to be needed to support the program going forward. Just 2 more slides here. So again, although we're here for knowledge exchange to support the 2 billion trees, we also want to just let you know that our mandate is to have the genetic diversity of our forest, trees, and shrubs in situ conservation. That's our conservation mandate. So if you're listening to this presentation, you're involved in 2 billion trees or not, and you want to help us meet our goals, please reach out to us. We're always open for collaboration and working with you to meet the conservation goals of the country. And just one last thing, again, regionally, we know that depending on what region you're in, there's different level supports and infrastructure available to assist you. And we're really here to fill in those gaps, but maybe we're just here to point you in the direction, because if there's already people there to support you in your region, then that's going to be the first avenue, the first place we send you. But a couple of other things, if you're heading out to the field and you're really not sure of what you're doing, if you're looking for, if you let us know, we can set up that you can document with real-time text to picture or through iNaturalist, and we can have one of our staff members sort of walk you through and let you know what we're seeing from your photos. And then we can actually help you, maybe do a cut test in the field to let you know what we're seeing. The other thing we can do is, again, I mentioned earlier, is that we can customize collection calendars for your area. So it'll give you a better idea of when you should be looking for certain species. Okay. So just a last couple of slides, and I really have to replace my bad hair day picture here. But you met Bernie earlier, and Melissa's been on the line. But we also have Naren Hay and Mary Knockwood, who are in charge of our Indigenous seed strategy in our program. Kieran Volk is part of our knowledge mobilization team. Roger and Matt are special projects with our team, but also fill in our field staff. Katie runs our lab, and then Jacob and Lindsay are our two main lab technicians and field technicians. And with that, we'll put up, open things up for question period. And this is just a list of references from material that we drew for this presentation today. So thank you very much.
So if anyone has questions, they can type them in the Q&A tab, which is right next to the chat tab on the bottom of your screen. We had a couple of them come in during the presentation, so we'll start with those. The first question comes from Storm. It is, in regard to the sampling guidelines and genetic diversity, climatically different sites, would you consider upland versus floodplain silver maple to be genetically different? Would their growing conditions impact their seed production?
Yeah, so I'll take a stab at that first, Storm. So when we're making collections, we generally use eco-districts, and we, again, there's a lot of genetic work being done on our industrial forest species, but for a lot of other species, unless it's a species at risk, there hasn't been a lot of genetic work done. So in lieu of that, we try to make our collections based on eco-districts. And, our thought process that within an eco-district, normally your climate, your soils, and your humidity factors are generally about the same. And that's sort of what dictates an eco-district. And if we're collection within that eco-district, that we should be good as far as genetic diversity is concerned. But at the same time, if you're noticing a lot of variability in those sites within your eco-district, I'd say it absolutely makes sense to make collections and maybe to keep those separate. If you are making, riverbed collections as opposed to upland collections for a species like silver maple, it might be a good time to keep those separate and see what the results are down the road. And that's where being able to trace back to that individual, like your good records of where the seed came and having that traceability to go back to know where that seed came from is really going to be helpful. And that's one of the issues or problems right now is a lot of the seed, except for the seed that's available through our forest and reclamation industries, it's not geo-referenced. So it's hard to tell. And that's something that we're really encouraging through this program to do.
The next question comes from Ryan, and it's, would a food dehydrator work for drying seeds, or do you think it would get too warm?
So yeah, that's a good question. And that's where data loggers really come in handy. I can't say we've used food dehydrators. I don't know if Melissa or Bernie have any experience with that. But it's fairly rapid, right, with a food dehydrator. So you really have to be careful, because if you over dry your seed, you're also killing them, right?
There's one unit that I've used on a limited basis only because the temperature control was good, but I did back it up with a data logger because it would run about 10 degrees warmer than the dial said. So you can use it. I would not advise using it on willow and poplar because you will just blow them all over your room. But for other species that don't shatter, it can be useful to, I'd say, a limited degree. Because if you can keep them below, some a manual like the Woody Plant Seed Manual for certain species. There are temperature recommendations in there for opening certain things, but Bernie would know as well that we use more of a lab grade oven if we need to kiln something open. Most of the spring species, though, natural air drying would probably be best, getting them spread thin. Bernie, do you agree?
Yeah, I just saw the comment there, 70 degrees. That's way too warm, I think. One thing about drying, whether it be the seed or the freshly collected seed or the seed themselves, is the relative humidity in the building. Can't stress that enough. I remember trying to process some poplar, and the catkins were ripe. They were dehissing, but we couldn't get them to open. It was because of relative humidity. We didn't have humidity control at the time, and no matter how long we applied that hair dryer and shop vac to them, they just wouldn't open, and it was because of high relative humidity. So relative humidity, if you're going to be processing poplars, willows in an area where the air is moist, that I think would be a requirement. Or you just wait for those drier days, and sometimes you don't get them for a while.
Yeah, and that was why on the one slide Donnie emphasized having a dehumidifier set up. Even a home grade dehumidifier in a room can be much more beneficial than I'd say I'd rank a dehumidifier ahead of a food dehydrator if you had to buy something. Excellent.
Yeah, that was a great question. The next one is from Jesse. It is, what would you guys recommend for collecting from those big survivor white elms that are too tall for a bucket truck, or in some cases, even to easily throw a rope around a branch? Would that be a case where laying out a tarp and collecting over multiple days makes sense?
Yeah, I think, so again, we use a slingshot for getting those real high branches, but I do know it can be tough. But I know with a good slingshot, and that's something we can provide the information on where you purchase one of those. You can get ropes up over 90, 100 feet and shake the branches, but conditions have to be pretty good to be shaking branches from that height and actually be able to catch the seed. Yeah, I don't know. It's we haven't spent a lot of time. I know a lot of the ash or elm collections that were done before my time here. We haven't done any in the last 5 years, but Bernie might have some ideas.
Yeah, I don't think we collected in any of the trees that you're talking about there. We had access to a boom truck at the time, and we used that extensively. But elm is a problem just because of how they grow, and the foliage is usually fairly high up. Every once in a while, you're going to get an open tree that's going to have some branches that are accessible. But yeah, that's a concern. And just trying to catch some on a tarp. Those winged seed, if there's any kind of a breeze at all, they're going to fly away. And if there's no breeze, they're not going to come off that easily unless you can put a rope on them and start shaking. So it would be probably a lot of work unless it's a tree that you really, really want to collect from.
Okay, next question from Mary. If I wanted to collect red maple and germinate it this spring, should it go directly from the tree to a moist peat, or is there a step in between?
You want me to take that one, Donnie?
Sure.
Part of that whole maturing process, the seed have got to dry before they're going to germinate. Red maple is one of those species that's really neat because way south in their range, like in Georgia, they act very much like silver maple, and they will germinate that same spring. And to the point that you can't freeze them and store them like we do with the red maple here. So there's a lot of genetic variability across the range. The other issue with red maple is that the seed are somewhat dormant. I think I remember about 2 months of cold strat before before you can put them to germinate. So you could do it, but you would be really, really hard pressed to try to plant them that same year. So, and if that's the case, you're better off holding them for a little bit and doing a spring plant.
Thank you very much, Mary. Christian asks, are there any benefits to collect seeds outside of the ideal collection times? What would be the issues arising from collecting seeds on late summer or fall, for example?
Well, first of all, for your spring seeders, there won't be any seed to collect in the late summer, fall on those. So again, this year presentation was really just on those, the poplars, silver maple, red maple, and elm, and the willows. And those are the ones that are, they're going to be ready here in the next few weeks. The other maples, like our sugar maple or mountain maple, and the vast majority of our seed, they're not ripe at this time of the year. It is the fall, so you will be waiting. And it's the same idea then, and what we talk about in upcoming seminars is that you still have to wait till they're ripe. So species identification is really important to know what you're collecting from, and then waiting until they are ripe, those color indicators. The issue is you really can't wait too long if seed is still on the tree. So an example would be ash. A lot of the green ash, the seed is probably ripe by the end of September, but a lot of times it hangs on right until December and sometimes January. So there's no problem. That's just a natural process. It's drying out. When you think of the temperature at that time of the year, temperatures are dropping, which is good. Humidity is dropping, which is good. So the seed is naturally drying in its natural environment. So yeah, I think the only problem there is that the longer it's on the trees, the more chance that you're going to lose it to birds, more chance for parasites and stuff to get into the seed, and then overall the samaras and stuff start to rot. So you might get more molds and fungus and have issues with your seed the longer you leave it out in nature after it's ripe.
Another question from Mary: do the Kestrel and E-Tech unit do the same job, or each have different purposes?
I'll let Melissa take that one.
I was hoping somebody would ask about that. Yeah, so Mary, I got the X-Tech unit first. I was trying to replicate some of what the Millennium Seed Bank in Europe does with some low-tech stuff. I was looking for units that had reasonable accuracy and low cost. And then I bought the Kestrel one second. And the benefit to the Kestrel units is that I know Donnie just was saying about the technology. They do work on Bluetooth, so that you can connect to your phone. So if they're locked in something, you can log them without opening. So for example, Kristen in the chat was mentioning we do have like a little mini desiccator pail that we do use sometimes, or we've been experimenting with. And the nice part is you don't have to open the bucket and introduce more humidity. You can do the monitoring without having to look. And they do work through some pretty thick materials. And the X-Tech unit, the only thing I found with it is, you do have to make your own version of a lid and have a little seal. It's a little bit more complicated to build. The Kestrels are very simple. They're plug and play, and they data log. The X-Tech does not data log for you. So if you want a record of, and you can there's a lot of different options with the Kestrel. You can set it to log every 2 hours, every 12 hours, and it works on easily replaceable batteries. So I definitely recommend the Kestrel for folks now versus an X-Tech type setup, but X-Techs are useful in nurseries as a stationary tool. Hopefully that answers your question. And yeah, we have all the different units that we have, including our most expensive lab versions that we do our water activity measurements on. We have all of that listed in some of our equipment lists that we handed out in the first webinar. So if anybody's interested in that, let us know and we can resend those.
Thank you very much. This question comes from the person with the coolest name so far, anonymous attendee, can you talk a bit more about access to markets for these seeds? How are collectors connecting with buyers for the seeds?
Well, that is a good question. And it's one that I don't know if any of us have the answer at this point. So one of the things, again, with the 2 billion trees, as I mentioned, is that in the original call for proposal, seed collecting really wasn't called for yet. But as I said, we're hoping, and indications are that there might be a call for proposal coming out. But currently, if you're a seed collector, I'm kind of stumped as how you do maintain access. So I would say the first is to contact your province, your provincial seed centers, because I know that people and nurseries that are looking for seed a lot of times. So like for us in general here at the National Tree Seed Center, we get dozens and dozens of requests every year for seed from seed nurseries because they can't find seed. So I think, yeah, I hope a buyer soon. There we go. See, it's coming to our seminars and we're just linking people up. But that is one of the issues, again, is how do we develop a system where people who want to become involved in seed collecting, first of all, that they can make a good living doing it for that windows of opportunities for collections, but then how do they find a market for their seed? And that's one of the things that I think the 2 billion tree program, as it develops, is going to have to, it's going to be part of it, because there are going to be nurseries looking for seed collectors and seed in their local areas. I don't know if anyone else wanted to make a comment on that.
Sorry, I was typing. I was going to say I can unmute someone if anybody wants to speak up about seed purchasing. And yes, Derek, I'm going to find you a link for the Kestrel unit and mute myself.
While we're waiting for that, we have another question from Ryan. Are there any all-inclusive textbooks available for seed viability, harvest times, dry times, etc.?
Everything that was on the one slide. So in the US, a lot of people compare it. The Woody Plant Seed Manual is a lot of people's Bible. It's a free PDF online. It is US based. There's no perfect national equivalent of that in Canada. We are gathering as many resources as we can. The best ones, some of the best ones that we can suggest are complementary to those, and also specific to certain provinces, so that they're a lot more local and include more data that's northern range edge than perhaps the US one. But we can definitely provide a few more links in those. We've been giving out tons of URLs to people that want to look at something. So I think if you ask a more specific species question, we can help with that.
Yeah, that's one of the things that we've been working on for the last 4 or 5 years, because there really isn't a Canadian equivalent at the all-in-one book. So we have been working with our knowledge mobilization, including Bernie, his team, and putting together tech notes that are specific to species. So trying to get all the information that we can for a particular species from all the resources available to us into one sort of tech note, and then booster that with our own lab experiences and the experiences of our provincial counterparts and data they provide us.
I'll just add a little bit there on seed viability. You can improve seed viability a lot by paying attention when you're collecting and having a close look at what you're collecting. There's usually indicators there of whether the seed are going to be good or not, like cut tests to have a look, see if there's any insects or disease on the cones or on the fruit. So if you're collecting material that looks good and you cut and they're nice and firm inside, you're likely going to get good viability as long as you collect it at the right time and you took care of your seed. It's that complicated and that simple, I think.
Before we answer the last question that we have right now, I just wanted to remind everyone that if they want to hear about upcoming seminars or find out more about different training opportunities that we offer, please sign up for our newsletter. I'm posting the link to it in our chat right now. And with that, you'll be able to get any information that the National Tree Seed Center is up to It's very easy. You just fill out 3 lines, click 4 buttons, and you're in. One question is from Oliver, and he asks, are there any volunteer opportunities for new seed collecting enthusiasts in New Brunswick?
Yeah, so Oliver, I think that is a question that we could probably, if you reached out, we could have a conversation. Again, one of the things, and I think one of the maps we showed that there's always gaps. I mean, our overall goal is to have seed collected and in our conservation collection from each species that each tree and shrub species that naturally occurs in Canada. So there's close to 700 tree and shrub species, and then to have collections from each eco district. And the reason we're looking for that is that, you know, with natural disasters and catastrophes and forest insects and pests and invasives, that you never know what the next species is that could be in danger. And currently, all we've been doing is reacting. So we've been reacting to butternut canker, we react to Dutch elm disease, to emerald ash borer, to hemlock woolly adelgid, to mountain pine beetle, trying to get the genetic diversity of those species from the infected areas into conservation, so that when the problem resides, at least we have the genetic diversity of those species in conservation to come up with a reestablishment or a conservation program going forward. But we have tons and tons of gaps. So no matter what region of the country you're in, if you are looking at making, you know, volunteer collections and helping us out, then we are interested in working with you. But we want to make sure that you're doing it, you know, under the right regulations with the right certification. You're collecting from, you know, the right spots with, you know, not on trespassing. So we can't take responsibility for that unless we work directly with you and have conversations. So I encourage anyone to reach out and send us an email, and if you're interested, and we can sort of walk you through it.
Thank you for that question, Oliver. Next question is from Tina. Do you work only with tree and shrub species or other plants?
Yeah, so our mandate is tree and shrubs. And one of the things, again, our evolving mandate, it started off with just trees, and then with the signing up the Convention of Forest Biodiversity and Species at Risk Act, we kind of moved into shrubs. We do work with Parks Canada and certain conservation groups on other species of concern. And so basically, if there's nowhere else for organizations to turn to, and seed collection is a viable strategy for conservation purposes, then yes, we are open. We're also, again, Naren and Mary, on my screen, they're to the up and down on me, but again, as I mentioned, they're part of our Indigenous Seed Program, which we just launched in March. And one of the things, again, we're looking to work with Indigenous communities, not just on species that are of concern to us, but what's of concern to them. And, you know, we're hoping the foundation of that is going to be in trees and shrubs, but we also understand there's going to be other species that come up, and we're willing to work with those communities to meet their needs on those. So hopefully that answers your question.
Do Mary and Naren have anything to add to that, maybe? If they would like.
Sorry, unmute. Yes, I mean, we're reaching out and making contact with individuals, organizations, umbrella organizations, communities, Indigenous communities to talk about their I guess goals and interests in terms of collecting seed. In some cases, it's focused on restoration work. On some cases, it's really about food safety and food safety in their community, and ensuring that some of the traditional plants that they use for food and for medicinal purposes are available now and into the future. So if you're interested at all in talking about the Indigenous Seed Collection Program, or you have a contact who you think might be interested, please feel free to pass on our contact information. You can reach us through the National Tree Seed Center, or you can reach us through my email, and I'll put that in the chat in case anybody wants that.
Thank you, Naren. Oh, and Mary too.
I just want to kind of speak to Heather Charles's message. She said that virgin black ash would be an example of that is a very important, black ash is a very important species to most Indigenous communities in the East. Birch, we had Melissa Labrador on the call here a little while ago, and she was saying the same thing as well, because her and her dad are actually canoe makers, and they've been actually sharing that practice in several of Parks Canada's having sessions and building one canoe. One was in PEI a couple of years ago, and last year was in Ketchum-Kuchik down in Nova Scotia. So yeah, we're trying to be as inclusive, because of the fact that when we're looking at the forest and seed collection, it's in a holistic sense, as opposed to just being looking at it monoculturally. So we're trying to push that kind of sense for it as well. So yeah.
Thank you, Mary. How are we looking for time? Should we keep on answering questions?
Let's go another till a quarter after.
Okay.
That's okay.
Perfect. Daniel asks, would it be possible for the Federal Seed Center to set up a forum for seed collectors and seed requesters, like a Kijiji for seed?
So it's I'm smiling at that, because back in 2017, we just finished our seed survey that Melissa was running for us, along with our collaborators, Accenture and Wilder Climate Solutions, who were partnering with us on that survey. It just closed. I know Melissa and the team, I know Kieran was involved, are still making follow-up calls. But my point is that when we first got our funding to start investigating doing a seed supply survey for Canada, that's how I actually envisioned it. I thought that the National Tree Seed Center, one of our roles might be to sort of be a database with collectors and buyers, a place that people could come. And I don't know. I really don't know if that is the role that we should be playing, but it's definitely something that's in the back of my mind that, I think that it's lacking currently. And, there are a lot of people who are interested in seed collecting, but they don't necessarily where their seed would go. Like, I want to seed collect. I know it's a great year. I have the tools, I have the desire, but if I make the collections, what am I going to do with the seed? And they don't always have a buyer. So, I think it's a great question. And I think it's something that, needs to be set up and coordinated for the country. Anyone else have any comments on that?
Yes, I will add that it's been batted around in a number of different organizations in different contexts. And I think, just to support what Donnie's saying, I think that I think one of the big holes that's missing in certain places in the country, not in all parts of the country, because for forest tree seed, there's some really well organized groups in Alberta and BC. But for certain sectors and certain regions, the coordinating of that takes up a lot of resources. I don't know if everyone appreciates in some cases, and it does add cost and time. So we will try and get if you let us know what region you're in, we will try our best right now to connect you to the best seed organization that can help you with buyers. But again, we are kind of lacking that at a national scale, that there is no Kijiji for seed. And outside of legislated reforestation, there's just a lot more, you can call it looser rules or flexibility, one of the two. And that, organizing that takes up a lot of time and effort. One good tool I would suggest that we found in reviewing what we were doing for the national survey was to look at the BC NLA, like the Nursery Landscape Association has a plant search function there. And whomever is growing native species from seed in BC, that's a really great tool to connect you directly to, who is propagating it. So that's just one example of something I've seen that, and I've talked to the person who organizes that. And she does a lot of work to make that happen every year, but it is the kind of tool I think you're talking about, Daniel.
I think just a follow up on that, sorry, is that a Kijiji, as long as it's a local Kijiji, because what we don't want to have is seed collected in Fredericton, New Brunswick, all of a sudden being shipped to, northern Quebec or British Columbia, because that is opposite to what the program is about. That would be collecting the right seed, maybe from the right species, and then planting it in a totally inappropriate region. So if that were to be set up, again, you really can't stress enough, is that, going forward, is being able to source where your seed came from is going to be so important. And just an example, I mentioned it last presentation, was, the city of Toronto came out with documentations recently that they are going to start looking for seed source for all of their urban plantations. And that's something that hasn't happened. It hasn't happened in North America that I know of, where an actual large urban entity is saying, no, seed source is important. We're not just going to take seed from anywhere and plant it out. We want to know where our seed's coming from, because we want it to be appropriate. Because again, it costs money. For every seedling or sapling you plant that's from an inappropriate seed source, the chances of that surviving diminishes greatly.
Griffin asks, can nurseries still provide seedlings to 2 billion tree projects? Is there a process to sign up? What do I do to talk about being a supplier of trees/shrubs?
I think the 2 billion tree program would be very happy to know that there's still nurseries out there that are not part and are interested in becoming part of the program. And I think the simplest thing to do is actually just type in, look for the 2 billion tree website. If you can't find something there, then again, reach back out to us again, and we can put you in contact, or put the 2 billion tree program in contact with you. I know, again, the call proposals for nurseries and for large landowners and stuff has already happened this year, but I think there really is a bottleneck in nurseries and nursery capacity to meet the demands of the program. So we said we were going to go to 3:15. We have 1 minute left if anybody has a final question. If not, any questions that maybe you didn't have a chance to type it in and you're thinking afterwards, again, you can email us the question, we will answer it, and then we can provide it back, because any question is a good question, and whatever you ask, it might be important to others.
I'm not seeing any more questions in the chat or in our Q&A tab. There might have been, there's some good comments talking about planting the right seeds in the right place. I'm not sure if we want to touch on that very quickly, because it seems like it's an active question thread right now.
Okay. Well, I think we're good at this moment. And again, our next seminar is on June 7th, focusing on harvesting berry crops. And we can continue dialogue, because a lot of these questions, they're pertinent right across for the entire realm of species where we're making seed collections from. All right.
Slides will be available. We'll have a follow-up email coming soon, and that will include slides, some supporting documents, and a link to the recording, and the links to the previous recordings as well. So if you came late, you can still access it, and there will also be a slide translation in French too. Remind everyone to sign up for the newsletter as you're exiting so you can get more information.
Okay, well, thank you very much.